our 11 a.m. panel. New Mexico Mustangs, a treasure in our own backyard. We did this panel in Aztec, New Mexico, and it was very well received, so I'm really excited to do it again where we can live stream it. Today we have Dusty, Dusty Pierce, who's a very, oh my gosh, your knowledge, I'm trying to connect you up with so many people, because your knowledge of the Mustang is, that people don't realize how deep the Mustangs go in this country. And then we have Laura Harper, who is the filmmaker from Rambo, Mustang and the Garages and stuff. And then we have Sarah Ann, who I've been watching and following, and she's been part of the festival for a while with her square horse, which is what I have with Luciano, and the Andalusian horses, and the Mustangs. And we've now connected her up with the Wild Horse Fire Brigade people who are now understanding about the depth of the Mustang. So I'm going to turn it over. Each person can do a little introduction about what you have, what you know, and then we'll talk about the Mustang, the treasure in the next place.
One of the things that I found very interesting when I first started looking at Native Americans was how important the circle was. Circles and family, circles and the earth and the stars and the planets. And right down to when we would ride into camp at the end of the day, the direction we would ride the horses and circle the camp had meaning to it. So when I first started getting into this research on the horse, it was kind of interesting because the paleontologists believe the horse originated on North American continent about 55 million years ago. And that's called the Dawn horse. From that, we saw the development of the horse on North America. Now at this time, North America is an island continent that is completely isolated the rest of the world. At around 5 million years ago, we had a very interesting thing happen. We had North America be connected to South America through a bunch of volcanoes that we now call Central America. And this allowed the horses to migrate down into South America. So at the same time, we are seeing the genetic development of what will become the modern horse that just evolved. So we're seeing the horses have evolved from some of these early stages into what we now call the modern horse. So with this, we continue forward in time, and at around 1 million years ago, we had a series of languages start forming between North America and Asia. And these languages come and went over almost 1 million years. And this is where the horses migrated into the eastern states of Asia and into Europe and into Africa. So now we have horses on 5 of the 7 continents. Now, these horses continue to evolve. And according to paleontologists for a lot of years, the horses evolved up to about the Eocene about 12,000 years ago, or the end of the Ice Age, at which point in time most of the megafauna went extinct. So we're talking about horses, we're talking about mastodons, ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, several species of bears. And this was the common belief. But people who have been around horses, a horse is an animal that can survive snow better than most other animals because of its hooves. It has the ability to dig down through the snow and find food. So it was something that didn't make sense to me. So a number of years ago, I started doing research on this, and I now can say traveled into Asia, they traveled into Europe, they ended up in the Albuquerque Peninsula, and eventually the horses came back to North America, but they cheated. They took luxury cruise ships to, you know, the early Spanish colonies. So that completed the circle of the horse coming back on the farm that we generally refer to as the Spanish horse. So we have some experts here who are going to talk about that. And when I was working with Bob Brown, we would capture Mustangs off the Caracas Mesa in northern New Mexico. And we were really interested in doing some genetic testing done on these Mustangs because we were curious. We were seeing traits in these horses that we suspected to be traits from breeds of horses that you don't normally think would be here. And as a result of that, we have some very interesting genetic information on this Caracas Mesa herd. So now that we've come full circle with the horse, I'm going to hand this over to Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Harper, and I am the proud owner of my Mustang Rambo. And I call him Rambo at the Caracas Mesa, but I made a movie called Mustang at the Caracas Mesa documentary because I wanted to tell the whole story that Dusty Pierce has introduced us to is the full circle of the horse in its beginning 50 million years ago. But in obtaining Rambo, he was a third strike horse. That means he had had 3 adoptions and so was no longer viable. So he became $25. I adopted him for that and saved him from the sales authority, trip to sometimes the slaughterhouses and a long history of different adoptions. And so I wanted to know who Rambo is in association with human history and the history of humanity. And so I knew a man named Dr. Gus Coughlin, and I had heard of him through the BLM that they'd done a study in 2013 that we still hadn't had our hands on. And so with that study, we started understanding a little bit of who the Hickory Mustangs were. But when I sent in his DNA testing, I waited with bated breath, and when I got his testing back from his mane and tail, I found that he was a Galiceño. And then in my research, I learned that a Galiceño was from the Galicia area of the Portugal, northern Spain, Celtic century, 2nd century Celtic Spain area. So that was really fascinating to me. And so I want to call upon Sarah Hannon to talk a little bit about what that 2013 document that Dr. Cochran had done tells us a little bit about who Rambo is and how he's associated with his other cousins in the Hickory.
So I kind of fill in the gap between Dusty Pierce's long view from millions of years ago to what's happening now in the Hickory heritage horse herd. And when I finally got a hold of the study that Gus Coughlin had done, it turns out that the Hickory heritage herd is actually most closely related to the Polish primitive horse, the Mustang, which makes no sense, because how do you get a Polish horse to the Four Corners area? So to understand that, this is my specialty, and I tell people, I have a mind, looks like a kaleidoscope, put lots and lots of little pieces of information in, and I turn it around and around, and then finally the storyline comes up. So if we look at the Polish Konik, the medieval cavalry in Poland were mounted on Central European horses. That means horses that were bred in around the Alps in northern Italy and Slovenia and Austria, where the Lipzauner comes from. So those were the prime war horses, and the Poles really didn't breed horses at all. It's not horse country up there, and that's something that's very important to know when it comes to horse management areas. We're going to go that later. Shortly after the medieval sort of holy grail cavalry, holy cavalry thing was rolling big time, the Mongols decided to invade. And when the Mongols came, they did this pincher thing where they sent, it was, Genghis Khan, he sent a group of his sons and their horses north into Poland, and then south Slovenia, Italy, Spain, down that way. And they very nearly conquered the entire part of Western Europe, except that Genghis Khan fell off a horse and broke his fleet and all his sons had to go home. But
Can you hear her well enough?
Yeah, I can hear her.
But the interesting thing about the Mongols is that they rode mares. And they rode mares because they lived on mare's milk and occasionally bloodletting when they were out of campaign, so they didn't have to stop. They would just stop, and they didn't have to like stop overnight and eat and let the horses graze and fix their own food or go hunting or carry food with them. They just would stop and help the mare for a bit, and then they could go on again. So in Poland, what you have in these Polish primitive horses is a mixture of Central European horses with Central Asian horses. The way that that similar combination got to the Four Corners area, you have to know Old World history. So the Islamic Empire mercenary cavalry were the Saracens. They were Central Asian horse nomads, which we now know as like the Kazakhstans and the Afghanistans, all of those guys. They actually produced, and there's a book out there you can find, one called Rulers, Raiders, and Traders, where they talk about how the light horse cavalry mounts were bred in these huge, huge herds on the steppes. They were trained, and then the military, with their mounts, would go and work for the giant empires. It was part of how they managed to survive and not get wiped out. They were the shock troops for the Islamic Empire, and they had a tendency to be considered rebels and seditious and treasonous because once the battle's over, the bureaucrats really want the horse people to settle down and quit running around and fighting. And the horses are migratory. They need to move. The peoples that live with them need to move. And so they don't obey sedentary rules like that. So a lot of them took refuge in Spain, which was the frontier. The center of the Islamic Empire was in Turkey. So by the time you got to Spain, you were like far, far away, and you could do slightly out of the norm things to be accepted. When the Catholic Spanish aristocracy overthrew the Islamic Empire, they came up with the doctrine of discovery, and 1493 version was recently rescinded. What nobody talks about is the 1452 version that strictly targeted the mercenary light horse cavalry of the Islamic Empire because they were the biggest threat to the Spanish Catholic aristocracy. So by the time the New World has been found, we have a whole bunch of people who have the knowledge and the equipment and the need to get out of Spain with their horses. Because what the doctrine of discovery said was these people should be dispossessed and enslaved for perpetuity. And if you don't want to see your children dispossessed and turned into slaves for perpetuity, you're going to go to some pretty extreme lengths to get someplace where they can be free. This is not documented in Western European history because you don't want the Spanish Inquisition to know where you're going. So between 1493 and about 1507, there aren't really good records of the horses that left Spain. What we do have is a complaint by Christopher Columbus saying the horses that arrived are not the ones that he ordered, and the people that showed up with them are not the ones that he wanted to show up. Christopher Columbus goes back to Spain to deliver his complaints partly, and when he returns, that entire settlement of Iberian Spanish colonists has vanished, and we don't know where they went. Where they went, I think it was to the mainland. They integrated in with the indigenous people. The Apache are recognized by the anthropologists and the archaeologists as the first indigenous people in North America to fully assimilate the colonial Spanish type of horsemanship into their culture. They have the Central Asian horses. They live in the Four Corners. Then we have several hundred years of history, which I'm going to skip because we only have an hour to talk about, and jump to 1840. In 1840, there's this really charismatic Shoshone horse raider / trader, and he manages to get together a big group of cosmopolitan guys. So he has Peg Leg Smith, who's an Anglo trapper and trader. He has French and Indian trappers and traders. He has Apaches, he has Navajos, he has Utes, he has Shoshone. And he says, look guys, what we can do is we can head to California and we can take every rival horse between San Luis Obispo and Los Angeles, and we can bring them to Santa Fe, actually a very successful breed. They get over 5,000 horses. The California mission horses, their genetics are actually North Italian. They're Central European horses. So I have to go, where did the Central European horses come from? So I have to go back to the old world. Charles III in 1740 was the first Spanish king to have grown up in Italy. The Spanish Habsburg aristocracy married into and had control over all kinds of weird little patchwork places. Northern Italy was one of them. That's where he grew up. That's where he had friends. The horses that he rode are the ones that historians talk about as the Neapolitan. So when he becomes king of Spain, he brings his friends and his friends' horses with him, because that's part of what he got as an aristocrat. He got trade purposes. When he mounted the California mission expeditions, he mounted them on his northern Italian horses. Those are the horses that came across. They didn't go too far north because the Apaches were raiding and trading, and so were the Comanches. So they had to go very far to the south. They came up by the head of the Gulf of Baja California and up along the California coast. But again, you have these Northern European horses, so they end up in four corners, and they interbreed with the Central Asian horses that have been there since the early 1500s. So our horses here in New Mexico, and that goes back to the name of this talk, the treasures in our own backyard, they have an incredible amount of history in their genetics. If we look at their genetics, we have to understand how incredibly cosmopolitan and crossroads this northern New Mexico part of the world really is. We have people from all over, we have horses from all over, and we need to appreciate it, and we need to keep the horses.
That leads right into Rambo, I guess, and some of the things that I've learned from Sarah and from Dusty about how important and what a treasure he is. So when I find out that he's the Galiseño, and I find out that he's a Garano, then I start wanting to register him as a breed Galiseño. So when I start to do that, I find out there's some little flaws there. That Rambo's muzzle is a little bit not right to fit in for the Galiseño. No, his muzzle fit just perfectly as a Galiseño, but his eyes were a little bit too far apart. And then I find that he fits the Galiseño perfectly for the registry, and they'll take him, but only as a indice horse. I couldn't register him completely because his legs were a little bit too wide. And so I talked to Sarah about that, and she says, well, run down to the barn and find out how far apart are his ears. And so I go down there and I measure, and I call her on the phone and I say 3 inches, and she said, that's just perfect. He sounds like he might fit the conquistador armor. And so then she sent me back down to find out how tall he was and exactly what were the dimensions between his shoulders, his hindquarters on both sides. And I find out it's 14.1 hands, and it's equal from his length to his width on both sides. He's 3 inches apart in his ears, and his eyes are far apart. So that has a little bit to do with the conquistador armor. And you had talked a little bit about that earlier, and I'll give that to you to talk about that.
Most people do not realize when the conquistadors first came here, they were primarily stallions. And they had a lot of ego, if you would, and they had to be mounted on a stallion, unlike the men that conquered the world by the invaders. So it's kind of interesting. But these horses had to carry the weight of the rider, his armor, and their armor. So it took a horse with a particular size and strength, because they had to kind of mass produce this armor. It wasn't just custom made per horse. Now, a lot of the soldiers had somewhat custom made armor if they had enough money to purchase it. If they didn't, they had to wear whatever they could get. But the horses were produced basically kind of one size fit all, and this is what we're finding in horses like Rambo.
Well, another thing that's fascinating to me about our history of horses and that about armor and the thought of war and the thought of the cavalry
this armor, we have armor for the dogs. They had like big fighting dogs that were mastiffs, and they had, spike collars to protect their neck and some other stuff. So we have armor for the footman, we have armor for the knight, and we have a complete set of horse armor, which includes the neck, the chevron, the flanks, the croup, the horse flank, totally covered with metal. And we can't find any modern horses that can fit this armor. And it was pretty much of a dare. They said, we've heard you had Spanish horses, and if you can get us the measurements, we'll see if this armor can fit. Well, I had grown up hearing stories from my father and my godfather, who was an old historian, and they, in the Cacique, the religious leader of the Quedas speaking Locos. And so I knew my horses were Spanish. I didn't have any hesitation. So I measured everything. I measured how tall and how long and how big around and how, long their neck was. And I sent all this information off to them, and they took it and sent it to the guy that makes the Kentucky Derby Hall of Fame horses for the Kentucky Derby and the Horse Museum there. And I got a call after the model was made and shipped, and they said, we took the measurements, we put the armor on, it fits perfectly, except that we had to saw the fiberglass ears off the hot wire and replace them further to the outside. Because the way the chevron was fixed, the horses have a very wide space between their ears, and their ears are set very low. So I went, okay, that's fine. Because I hadn't actually made a big deal about measuring between their ears and between their eyes. So you jump forward 30 years, and I have a little Spanish colonial Spanish stallion, and I cannot get a horse ear to fit in because now everything's ergonomically designed and it has nice little crescent cutouts to fit around their ears. And if I put it on him, a half an inch of gap in the base of his ear and make it miserable. And I came across an article written by a world-renowned expert, Sharon May Davis, they call her the Bone Lady, who looks at, she's a forensic equine specialist, she looks at horse anatomy and horse bones. And she had come through, she's Australian, she had come through North America about 20 years ago. And she looked at a bunch of skeletons on one of the Spanish Mustang ranchers, and she said, you guys, I have never seen an atlas bone like this. The bone right behind, between the skull and the neck is butterfly shaped. On most horses, it's shaped like a seaflant, shaped like this. Yours is wide and flat. And I went, we have this wide, flat bone that makes the ears, he said, very wide, and it has bred true from the 15th century, built about Albuquerque's stables to the backwoods of northern Mexico. These horses, down to the bone, are the same horses that were being ridden 500 years ago. So that was quite a phenomenon, and it actually triggered a whole bunch of research into biomechanics and equine pathology, and I'm not going to go into all of that right now, except to say they're very special, they're very unique, and they're very, very rare.
Such outstanding information. Can we're having trouble up here a little bit, if we can have
Silence in the back, please.
hello? What? We're having a little bit of,
This conversation is like echoing behind us.
Oh, we can hear you really good.
yeah, well, it's difficult for us up here with that conversation in the background. But anyway, thank you so much for that information. And that kind of goes into the concept of history and where really does domestication and the farrow and all of these ideas about the horses from history takes us. And I don't know which direction to go first. Dusty, would you like to take that first? And
I'm going to make an interesting comment, or at least interesting to me, is when we first were doing the genetic testing on these horses, I really expected that we would see, quarter horse or Arabian, mixture, because this is 2024. And these horses up on Caracas Mesa, I didn't expect it to be a genetic stronghold from 500 years ago. So one of the things that means is that these Spanish horses here in New Mexico are the last of this bloodline. Because in Spain, all of that has been bred out of the Spanish horse. me, that was just a fun piece of information. I'll pass this on.
So with the Dr. Cochran information that was provided us, one of the things that he discussed was that 6,000 years ago might have been, the idea that horses were first domesticated, and that was because of that was a bit where from what they were finding in their artifacts. But we're finding that does domestication really matter, and what is the link, and what is really the discussion that we should be having about the difference between a wild horse, a feral horse, and a domestic horse.
Which is the hot spot. But what I have to say to you all is that up until the industrialization of hay balers, horses were always bred on the range. And the empires, the Islamic Empire, the Silk Road, which should have been named the Horse Road, the Spanish colonial empire, they all depended on horses. And those horses were bred and raised in huge free-roaming herds in North Africa and Central Asia. I just saw a photo of a stable in Morocco that they had found during the archaeological digs that housed 12,000 stallions. Okay, that's a lot of horses. The way that those horses were raised is you had your nomadic horse tribes, and people want to clump them into one group, but they're very much like the Plains Indians here. You had a whole bunch of different languages, a whole bunch of different microclimates, a whole bunch of different families with different traditions and different alliances. Each one of them developed their own unique strain. I'm working with a geneticist in North Africa right now to learn more about that. And the mares and the foals were left out to run free. The colts were captured somewhere between 3 and 7, brought in, trained, and sold. When that technique, I don't know what to call it, that cultural connection was broken, the empires collapsed because the horses that were raised in captivity were not sane enough or sound enough to be used in harm service. What we've discovered in the last 100 years of Victorian purebred stud boats raising horses in intensive farm care is that breeders have consolidated a whole range of really horrible recessive genetic mutations that are crippling the horses. And the loss of genetic diversity is catastrophic. It's so catastrophic that they actually established something called the Global Equine Genetic Diversity Consortium to research horses like our North American Victoria horses, to make sure that we have pools of healthy horses genetics to pull from so that there can be a future for domestic horses. There's a little bit of talk about how if you domesticate animals, they get cuter and smaller and bigger heads and more infantile-looking eyes. That doesn't actually work for horses. The breeds that have been bred, and as I said, this is the hotspot, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but horses that have been bred for, I call them Loch Ness necks, the long, lanky neck and the big eyes and the dished face, actually produce an incredible number of deformed skulls and necks, and they are not functional. One of my reasons for being against horse slaughter, because when you have a set of live horse slaughter, you can kill off the horses that don't meet your expectations without informing anybody. And I'm like, let's keep them alive and people see them actually breathing. There are 2 mutations that appear around the time as this whole mercenary light horse cavalry, which is about 4,000 years ago in Persia, Iran, Turkey, in that area. One of them has to do with a mutation that reduces the sensitivity and reactivity of the horse's backs. Now let's talk to you about the reason we can't ride a Przewalski horse is when you touch certain spots on their back, it's an automatic reflex. It doesn't go to their brain. They just stop to get rid of it. That's a survival trait. With that lesson, it's easier for horses to tolerate poor horsemanship. I'm not sure that that's actually a good thing for the horse, but it got spread around pretty far. The other mutation that's kind of interesting is the difference in reactivity to, and you find it, it's really popular now. So is your horse curious or are they vigilant? Well, the curious horses have more of a, their adrenal and decide, which also makes it easier. That doesn't affect their need to be out running around in big herds on large areas in order to develop to be sound, safe, and healthy animals.
So outstanding. It takes me then back to Rambo and how important he is and why he's such an important heirloom. And it's too bad he's gilded, but that's what we have. But so that's part of the reason why our horses are so important to be. Dr. Gus Coughlin put it this way. He said they are an heirloom, and there's so much that we don't know scientifically about them. And with them existing as they are in their genetic makeup, we can find more about that and then what to do to help our genetic diversity and our breeds and our horses. But the breeding is one of the things that I didn't quite understand until I became Rambo's owner. And that is that I thought a wild horse was a wild horse. And then I concluded, of course, that a horse is a horse, of course. He's Equus cavalis. But I did not realize that he had a genetic makeup of a historical relationship to the old world that connected the old world to New Mexico. And that is that herd is, and you can help me with this too, Sarah, so that I don't get this wrong, but they're the Alpine makeup. So that would be your Italian, Lusitano, and your Norders, your Belgium, from France, your Belgian draft. And what was fascinating to me is that in his genetic marker came a cream draft. And then I did some research on my own to find out that a cream draft is a rare, wonderful draft horse bred in Iowa. Why was he coming up in this Hickory makeup? And what did that mean about the purebred of the Alpine breeding of Rambo? And so Sarah helped me understand about how you can connect the 19th century horses that were after the old world horses came about to be in a cream draft in Rambo that relates him to France.
There's a whole other piece of story there. And I, of course, was very indignant when my Hickory, I have Stallion, I'm keeping him whole. Entire, entero, as they say in Spanish. And I'm like, what is this American cream draft? Because I look it up, and it's a breed that was not established until after World War II. So I'm like, how does the American cream draft get to the Four Corners area? Show me the documentation. Because there are, the Nakota horses were very popular, very well known up in the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. There was a French rancher who bought horses from the cavalry after one of the battles, Little Bighorn battles with the Plains Indians, and then he imported 6 Percheron stallions and 30 Percheron mares, and then he crossbred the two. So I'm going, okay, if there's draft horses and Percherons in the Dakotas, we know how they got there. So where's the documentation for getting these horses into northern New Mexico? Because I worked with a vet in the 80s, and we worked on draft horses, and they do not do well in New Mexico. They're too big, they're too heavy, and their feet disintegrate. So they're, to get a viable breeding population, you're really going to have to work at it. Then I was working with the guy who's establishing the Mexican Criollo registry. And Texas A&M's horse ancestry report starts spitting out that there's American cream draft horses in Jalisco, Mexico. And I'm going, honestly, you're going to have to show me how you got an American cream draft horse, which is like, they're 17 hands, they weigh 1,800 pounds. They're not going to live in a little tiny village on the mountain coast of Jalisco. You need to show me how it got there. So I went and looked up the history of the American enough of them survived that after World War II, they came up with this registry. So the American cream draft horse has the same kind of genetic profile as the Polish Conacher and as the Hickory horses, but again, it's a completely different story of how it got there. We got horses from Central European heavy draft horses that were brought over, again, 150 years later, crossed on these Spanish mares. So there's interpreting, and I actually got very testy with the Equine Geneticists. I know you guys aren't historians, but honestly, if you're going to interpret your results on the basis of like politically correct 8th grade textbooks, you discredit yourselves. You make yourself look stupid, and people will not accept what you're claiming. You need to go back and know where they came from. And right now, I'm working with Edelon, who went, oh, wow, we have to look through some hoops to get the ancient horse down. This is really exciting. Oh my God, I'm behind the curve. I have lots to learn. So I'm really hoping that in the next couple of years, we get some reasonable feedback on the interpretations of the horse ancestry so that we can really understand how deep the roots are. And when you have these interesting correlations show up, understand that it's not that they're descendants, it's that they're cousins. They go all the way back to the same historical roots. And that opens up, it's like this huge window into human history. It's a phenomenal way of finding out about unwritten history. You have the documented stuff, it's like, let me write the history. Well, let me tell you, the DNA tells the true story. And that's one of the really exciting parts of what's happening in the country.
And that is so exciting because the other genetic profile on Rambo was a Welsh pony. So to have that cream draft, I was a little bit disconcerted. I didn't understand why a 19th century horse came into this play, and then for me, it gave me then the understanding and the reassuring that he wasn't just a cavalry horse that came from the wars from the Civil War coming, and then it kind of devaluing his really great breed, that he is a bred horse and his genetics are saying that he's of that alpine region. He is a 2nd century Celtic Dorano, Galliano, and then his second markers of Belgian draft with the cream draft, and Del Pony gave me a better understanding. And then it was also very interesting to me to learn from Dusty Pierce about the Acoma revolt in 1680, and then he had some other information that he found that even showed that the horses may have existed well before the Spanish brought them over.
In the last couple of years, we have received a lot of information, and this is largely because we are seeing a lot of Native Americans becoming paleontologists, and they are getting into these universities, and they're taking a second look at everything we thought we knew. We have had a discussion earlier about professors that lost their tenure for suggesting that the horse, never been extinct in America. But now we have all kinds of physical and genetic evidence of this. Not very far from here, we have the confluence of the San Juan River and the Piedmont River at Navajo Lake. And when they were doing the archaeological survey for that area before the flood in Navajo Lake, they discovered two very large Anasazi ruins like the confluence. So they were digging down, and in archaeology they use a term called context. So in the depth of the dig, they were in context that they believed was around the year 1200. And in that they started finding horse bones. Well, they knew this was impossible. This had to be a modern horse that somehow in the context was good. So they actually did some C14 bones, and the bones came back at around the year 1200. So they had proof of horses preborn in America right there. Okay, that information is still locked inside the museum. We are currently in the process of requesting the horse bones to see if we have enough Sarah Ann and I were talking earlier about some of the horses locally here in New Mexico, and some DNA markers that I found very interesting. So I'm going to tell you about those.
I'd love to hear about the Spanish colonial horses and New Mexico horses.
Yes, well, my godfather, who was the oral historian for Albuquerque tribes, which are between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, told stories about the horses that are now popularized and infamous as the Placitas horses. Now, some of the people who are trying to keep that herd viable got some DNA, 3 or 4 dead horses actually, and sent it off to UC Davis. And when the results came back, they said, well, you know, the DNA is like 95 to 98% identical to that of the Spanish Mustangs and the Spanish Mustang registry. But there are 3 previously unknown genetic markers. We don't know where they came from. And I'm like, you know, what we need to do is check those DNA markers with some of these older bones, because we may have horses here living right here in Albuquerque that are older than we can be imagined. It is so important to keep these free-roaming populations alive so we can figure this stuff out. And so I've been trying to persuade various people to do studies and to check this DNA with that DNA and to talk to people. But you know, my urgent need right now is to convince people here, living here, that those horses that you see when you drive to Santa Fe or hanging out on that desert land, they are living history. There are windows that go all the way back into a history that we can't even imagine. And we need to regard them as absolute. That's the name where they are genetic treasure chest. When you look into that genetic information that's locked in that library, that's locked in the genes, we find encyclopedias of information that can totally overturn the way we perceive horses in our world.
I always take it back to Rambo, and another thing I think is so fascinating about Rambo and his confirmation, if I can say that now, is that when I hear and I see the stories about cave art and the ancient cave arts, and I'd like to give both of your ideas on Rambo's build and what we see in those caves, and I guess I'll have Sarah go first.
Well, one of the discussions that I got into through this Spanish armor was there was a very specific build. In World Times, they talked about square and rectangular horses. And among the colonial Spanish horse people, there was huge arguments about something they called the Spanish hip. And I tend to have a very literal mind, and I'm going, what are you guys talking about? So I went and looked at it, and the horses that have functioned as cavalry horses, these light cavalry horses, for thousands of years, have a very specific biomechanical bone structure. They have a 90-degree angle at their hip and shoulder joints. They have a very long sloping shoulder and a very steeply sloped pelvis. And when you draw lines from their point of their shoulder and their hip joint, you get actually a diamond. It's an absolute equilateral square, but it's rotated 90 degrees. And when you ride the horse, you sit directly in the middle of that diamond. And with this build, the horse does not expend any energy lifting themselves or their rider up. All of their energy goes to moving forward. And this is incredibly important in an environment like this because, and I've been saying this for decades, and I finally got some feedback from horse rescues, that the reason that we have this specific type of horse in New Mexico is because they are so energy efficient. They live when their horses die. And if you drive up to Santa Fe, you can see how harsh that land is. And that's where some of the most consistent and oldest genetics come from. And that's because of this particular set of biomechanics, which is what the horse armor is designed to wear. I don't know where it originates. I haven't been able to find that. The Central Asian horses, like the Albuquerque and the Turcoman, are actually gallopers. They're race horses. They're bred to run fast. They're bred to disperse the muscular effort with big fire and nostrils. They're not built to conserve energy, and they conserve life force, basically. And then we have like the plow horses that are built to pull. And those probably come from like the North Sea. But this other look, we don't know where it came from. And on that point, I will turn it over to Dusty.
developed, or group of horses?
Therefore, this is why we need to go to Dusty. We're talking about evolution of different types.
Yeah.
And it takes thousands of years for horses to adapt to specific
Thousands, okay.
livestock, like climates.
Yeah.
So like the Gallopers are bred, have survived where there's enough grass that they can afford to burn off some extra energy galloping. And they need to run fast. They need to be, it's a lighter, longer-legged horse. The like the North Sea pony group, they're evolved to haul their large feet out of thick, sticky, wet mud. They're evolved because people thought, the whole blood tap, like horse snack. It's like, well, they do everything they can to preserve heat. You don't want to have all of your arteries exposed to the freezing cold, humid air. You will die. So you have different types of horses that have evolved to live in different microenvironments. This type of horse, the square horse, thrives in these high, dry, arid, really rugged desert climates. That's like Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, that's North Africa, that is northern Mexico. Not that one.
And before I hand this to Dusty, I'll just say this one thing, and help me if I'm correct. I looked at Rambo, and I see him as the Spanish Jeunesse, and I use that term. And I understand that he is the Berber of the Arabian, and then I also, say the Turkoman because of the horses of that area, the Celtic. And so that evolved over 800 years, to become what they were, by the time that they landed with the conquistadors over here in North America. But with that, then Rambo, his body type in the caves.
When you take a look at the rock art,
All right, you guys here from last year? Yeah,
we have a lot of
it
fun
is.
with people trying to interpret what this rock art might mean. And one of the things we find is sometimes we find individual horses in the rock art. Now, most people do not know this, but in Chaco Canyon, we have an image of a horse with a rider. Okay? We have quite a few images like this scattered all over the United States that most people are completely unaware of. Now, the rule of thumb is if you go down to Newspaper Rock and you see all of the horses on Newspaper Rock, the first thing is all of those images have to be after 1500 because it's a horse. They never considered actually doing science and seeing if these images of horses could be before 1500. So one of the things that's happening is in some cases we're able to come up with a lot more information on the rock art. Now, one of the best ones for that is cave paintings. Okay, a lot of times the pigments that they painted with have enough carbon in them that we can do actual dating on them. So in Spain and Iberia, we have a lot of caves over there. But we also have caves right here in the United States and in Old Mexico that have images of horses that are without a doubt pre-Columbian. So I have one image that I like to show people, and everybody looks at it, and I ask them, it's an unidentified animal according to the people studying the rock art. And the only thing that they would admit is it's a quadruped. It has a tail that hangs down to the ground, and it has 4 round hooves, and it has a long neck and face, but they don't know what kind of animal it is. There's a reason they don't know what kind of animal it is. It's because they have dated skin and hair and hide and DNA. And one of the things we are hoping to do with the National Mustang Association is to maybe create a database and start gathering all of this information together so that we have a master database on this horse DNA that can be referenced. So, would you like to talk about some of the stuff how I did it?
5 minutes, but.
We have 5 minutes, and that was where we wanted to round it up. So if you could just round it up for us to say how it was full circle, how the horses were here, there, and now back again.
Yes.
And you're back tomorrow too, to talk.
Sure. So if there's questions, we can take, we'll address questions tomorrow, because we really want to like that. Lisa Pearson, who's organizing this whole thing, put me in touch with Edelon. And I was talking with Edelon about how to come up with a horse ancestry report that's actually relevant to North American horses. And she said, oh my God, she said, I'm so far behind the curve. I have to jump on board and look at this and get the DNA banks of the ancient horses in order to come up with results that are useful. Because right now, if you go to Texas A&M and you put in your Mustang, it comes back with a whole lot of like European warm bloods. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, folks, and we touched a little bit on this with the Welsh pony. It doesn't mean that somebody dumped a breeding population of Hanoverians in the Nevada desert. What actually happened was 8 to 9 million horses were killed during World War I. It was the end of the cavalry as the queen of the battlefield. 1.5 million of our free-roaming horses were rounded up, broke to saddle, shipped across the seas, and they mostly were used in positions of logistics and support, so they didn't die as quickly as the previous ones. So when you look at the Welsh pony that shows up on your Mustang thing, if you look at the Holstein and the Tropiner, what you're actually seeing is our North American horses' influence on the European warbloods, on the European horses. So we need to have this huge database that goes back to the roots of where the horses came from in order to explore this puzzle, because it's not a straight line. It's a matrix. It's an incredibly intricate woven pattern. It was very much like my jacket. You're going to find threads